do you think our lived experiences impact the way that we relate to others?
It kind of sets a tone for how we perceive life, how we perceive ourselves. And then later on, I find it really definitely sets the tone in how we build our attachments in our relationships. As you're trying to find yourself, you don't know who you are under these new circumstances with these boundaries and these values. They've never been respected before.
You can see that happen with parents and family members, siblings, spouses. How did this end up affecting all of the different relationships that you had in your life?
Oh, it affected it greatly. I lost lifelong friends because we just grew apart. If you want the train to go on a different direction, you got to lay out a different track for it to go on. I just want to tell people that you're not alone, and hand in hand, we got this.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Flip Your Mindset. I'm your host, Stacey Uhrig, and today's guest is Anna Maria. Anna Maria has been on the show before, and in our first episode with Anna Maria, she shared with us her lived experience as somebody who was growing up in Romania, who had a lot of interpersonal abuse, but then also was in this collective trauma, if you will, by being in a communist country at the time. And then, of course, moving here and immigrating as a young child, all very impactful. It was a really great conversation about how that actually ended up landing her in the hospital, in her 30s, almost 20 years after she came here. And I really feel very strongly that people need to go back and listen to that first episode, which the link for that is in the show notes. But what I wanted to bring her back on today was to talk about how do these experiences, in her particular case, her personal experience, but in general with people as well, people she sees in her practice, how these kinds of experience impact our lives, specifically in the way that we relate to ourselves and therefore to other people. How does it impact our relationships? Our family relationships, our dating relationships, our work relationships, and what do people need to be on the lookout for that they may have some trauma, if you will, or unhealed wounds that need to be healed and nurtured in order to have better relationships. So welcome back, Anna Maria.
Thank you, Stacey. Nice to be here with you talking about such important things in our life.
Yeah. So how do you think our lived experiences impact the way that we relate to others?
I feel that, as we're growing up, especially when we're younger in our childhood, we don't even know what this all is. So then we kind of grow into learning of what this environment around us is, and it's the world. And then we kind of grow into ourselves and we interpret this as a dance, as a relationship between us and the environment, the outside world. And is it a safe place? Is it an unsafe place? Is it a friendly place? Is it a kind place? And then what our meaning is inside this world. How are we perceived? And we use a lot of that to draw conclusions about ourselves as we're growing up, because it's almost like the world around us and our caregivers and those close to us are kind of like the sounding board of the conclusions we draw about what this is all about, this whole life, what's going on. So it kind of sets a tone for how we perceive life, how we perceive ourselves. And then later on, I find it really definitely sets the tone in how we build our attachments in our relationships.
So can you expand on that and share maybe either through your own personal experience or maybe a series of different coaching experiences that you've seen, how that might look?
Well, I'll just use myself because I find that I have no trouble. Now that I know how important this is for others to be vulnerable, I have no problems being vulnerable and transparent. So I learned, my dad was an aggressive personality, short-tempered personality. My mom was very absorbed with her life and the things that were important with her. I won't give any diagnoses.
And I'll just pick that up and put that over here.
They did the best with what they could. But because of that, I learned that the world was kind of scary through their temperaments and also not very kind and welcoming, and also kind of not very soft for me to. I'm a highly sensitive person, an HSP, so I needed that warmth and that compassion and that safety in order for me to open up and to blossom. So there were definitely parts of myself that I never had the opportunity growing up, well until my 30s, really, to open up and blossom because there was never the environment for me to do so. And those parts became suppressed in a way. And then after I left my home and went into the big wide world and chose a life partner, I had no idea that there were parts of myself that were yearning and longing to blossom and to find their place in this world. And my attachment was very disorganized, avoidant and anxious because of the dynamic in my household. So it was really hard for me to make how do I even say it, like a constructive choice for myself when picking a life partner. So it ended up being sort of a destructive choice for myself. But in a way, we were each other's kryptonite on our healing journeys. So that kind of like, the catalyst. But friendships, the same thing. I now looking back with all this wisdom, quote unquote, that I've gathered over these years, I could see my mom and my dad in so many of the friends I had made, in my bosses, in coworkers that I would get close to, in guys I chose to date. It was always some different version of my mom and my dad, somehow intertwined in their personality. And by different version, I mean like certain qualities and personality traits and things that they may struggle with that were inside those people's personalities as well. And I found it familiar. So it was the only way I knew how to operate. I didn't know that there was those other dormant part of me that needed an outlet. So I chose what I knew and, kind of created a life for myself where I replicated the same dynamics I tried to get away from my childhood, replicated it in my adulthood as my new life.
Yeah. And, I see this all the time where, and we talked about this earlier, we will always yield to what's familiar. So even if chaos and drama and angst and maybe even some aggression or some abusive words or, those kinds of dynamics are not productive or constructive to what you said, they're familiar. And I know how to manage them, and I know how to predict them, and I know how to control the outcomes. And so isn't this just the way life is? Isn't it like this everywhere for everyone? Right? And so we're not really awoken to the fact that it doesn't have to be this way.
Correct.
So where on your healing journey did you start to recognize that the way you related to yourself and others had been impacted by some of the experience we talked about in part 1?
Well, deep into my own therapy journey with my therapist, I discovered things like boundaries, things like common values. I didn't know what boundaries were. I didn't know what.
Give an example so people can understand.
So, for example, for me, a boundary is honesty. Like I need someone to be consistently honest with me. I'm not okay if somebody like gives me the runaround and withholds information from me. I didn't realize that that is actually a trigger for me and then sets me spiraling into my own dysfunctions. So one of the boundaries is you got to be honest, because if you're not, then this is really going to get icky. A value of mine is, having a harmonious environment. Like I want growth, like an environment where we seek growth, where, I don't know, we go for walks and health is important and we eat healthy and we're not bickering. And I just want like a harmonious home environment. That's something that I value, not like stress and running around and disorder and untidiness. And these are just values of mine. And yeah, those, if you add a bunch of things like that, like a list of boundaries and a list of values that you're not aligned in, can you imagine everyday life?
Well,
how
yes, because you lived it. I lived it, right? And a lot of people live it. And I think here's one of the places that people get hung up. And so I'll be curious to see what you think about this. There have been a handful of times where my clients are doing a needs assessment. You know, I have this little laminated form that I give them that's very colorful, and I give them a white, you know, an expo marker, and I say, here's a list of basic needs for yourself in life. And there's relational, and there's trust based needs, and there's, you know, personal needs, whatever it is. Which ones do you feel are important to you, right? These are like our values. These are our needs list. And they check them off and they're very clear on them. And I ask them to give me some examples of what that would look like for them. And then it becomes very, very clear to them that with, just like you said, the recognition of self, that their needs matter, by the way, because a lot of times I'm working with people whose needs are very deprioritized because they've always learned to put everybody's needs first, and that they have something that is their birthright, but they're in a relationship with someone who didn't buy into that. They're in a relationship with someone who that's not who they married. They didn't marry somebody who prioritizes themselves. They didn't marry somebody who has needs that need to be met. They didn't marry somebody who has a voice and has the choice to use it and is willing to set a boundary. They maybe married somebody who's an extreme people pleaser who deprioritizes self all the time and doesn't set boundaries. So if they were to walk into this new space and harness it, because as you said, what kind of life is it to live that way? There's a fear of the reckoning and the rumble. And I use that very strategically because I love Brene Brown's book. And this is usually when I recommend this book to people. It's like daring greatly. It's learning what pieces of armor have I been carrying? And am I, in her language, wholehearted? Or as you and I might say, are we in alignment with self? And we dare greatly and to shed those pieces of armor and step into self, as imperfectly perfect as it is. But then her second book after that, or her book after Daring Greatly, is called Rising Strong, which is all about the reckoning and the rumble, which is, I did it. I have shed these layers. I have found myself back home to me. And I know what's important for me, and I know how to prioritize my needs, and I have a voice. But now everybody around you is going, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not the Anna Maria I married. That's not the Anna Maria I hired. That's not the Anna Maria I raised. I want the old Anna Maria back.
That's
so now
exactly what happened in my marriage.
Of course it is. So now all of a sudden you have this conflict of like, well, shit, I love myself. I love myself, and I have done this work to get back to myself. And now there's going to be a fallout.
That's where it gets dicey. A lot of people who start this journey, like I remember when I started, I knew I didn't want to suffer like I did. And, you know, my breakdown happened like we discussed in the past episode. And then when I started doing the work, after like just 6 months of just skimming the surface, I'm like, oh my God. I remember telling my best friend, I'm like, I'm going to have to change every freaking category of my life. Like there's no category that's not going to have to change if I need to like live at least in alignment with who I am and who I'm starting to see that I am. Because like I said, there weren't even outlets for me to blossom those parts of myself. So that's when it's like, but because I had that breakdown, I had nothing left to lose basically. So, but I have to say that that's where the journey gets scary and dicey because we have to make a decision, and it sometimes becomes lonely as well because friendships end, you change jobs, you change careers, you change life partners. And to say that takes a second. To do it takes all of you.
You know, it's interesting. I'm familiar with a person who did this transformation for herself. And one of the things that she recognized during this time was that her relationship with her children was very toxic. because she had recreated what she had grown up in. And now she was not willing to play ball in that toxic swamp. And the kids hadn't done the work. And so now the kids are like, no, 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 this is how we play ball. And she's like, I don't play ball that way anymore.
Oof.
So now you have this dynamic where the kids are pushing and poking and prodding the bear, trying to get the volcano to erupt. And this person's like, not going to bite. So then what do? They push and prod and poke harder, bigger, louder, and they're not going to bite. You know, when you've decided to stay in your truth and you know that almost like your survival of self, like relies on it, you have to do really hard things. And in this particular case, some of her children are like, they don't want to get out of the swamp because that's what they know.
Yeah.
That's their comfort level. They're not ready to do the work. So you have to, as a parent, say, I love you. You're important to me, but I'm not willing to engage this way anymore. And if you want to have a healthy, productive, calm conversation, which is not the way that they used to communicate here.
Right.
But you can see that happen with parents and family members, siblings, spouses, right? So how did this end up affecting all of the different relationships that you had in your life?
Oh, it affected it greatly. And I said to myself, I literally lost myself. I lost my health. I lost all of me getting here. If having to gain myself, who I truly am, back, then I'm willing to lose what's not contributing to that. And I lost lifelong friends because we just grew apart. We naturally grew apart. I changed my career. I used to work corporate as an analyst, as a manager, and then I just switched to this. My marriage, my ex-husband and I, we tried to make it work for about 4 to 5 years under the new dynamic of me going to therapy. And he said after about 4 or 5 years, like, when I'm done, like, when are things going to go back to the way they were? And I said, I never. And he's like, well, I can't live like this anymore. And I'm like, well, then that's just going to have to be it. And that was really scary.
What was it that he wanted to go back to?
To me, being more submissive. We came from different backgrounds, different cultures. He's Mexican and he grew up in that macho type of thing. And I should not feel ashamed if I expect my wife to cook me breakfast on Sunday morning and serve it to me, and that sort of stuff, where I'll be like, okay, I'll gladly do that, but can you mop the floors? Because I'm not going to do the floors anymore. Like, I can't do everything.
So basically you started setting boundaries.
I started setting but I'm like basic boundaries. Like, we're talking like the bare minimum that wasn't there.
Hey, if I'm going to do this as a household member, can you do that?
Yeah, let's
right. And I think it's important to bring this up because this is a lot of what I think a lot of us see in our practices, which is I have, you'll have people come in saying, I'm just so afraid to ask my partner, my spouse, my husband, my wife to pitch in this way, which is really much more of just like a cohesive co-parenting, co-living way, because it's not the way that they started. And it could be literally as simple as, can you give the kids a bath? Can you change a diaper? I mean, I have had plenty of people in my life, not necessarily clients, that just said, oh, but they're working so hard, I'm not going to make them change diapers or, do the dishes. Like, no. But then once you start to realize, like, I'm burnt out and it's okay for me to ask for help. And part of the reason why I've been burnt out is because I don't set boundaries and I don't say no. I can't do it all. And I am an extreme people pleaser. And now that I have my voice, I'm going to say, I can make you breakfast, but that means that then I'm not going to be mopping the floor.
It was very hard. It was very hard because I felt almost like he was envious of my breakdown in a very twisted way, because this breakdown gave me permission to ask for all of these things that he didn't find fair. And I remember him saying, well, what if I'm what if I'm gonna have a breakdown? What then? So it just became like this competitive. I'm like, you're not, you're fine. Clearly you're the one that's fine and I'm not. But then trying to appease these new boundaries that I have, his health started breaking down over those 5 years. So he was not living, I guess, in alignment with what he wanted. And then when we split up, I found it so like this mopping of the floors. It's hilarious because after we split up and he had his girlfriend and my son saw her for the first time and she had just came to visit him. She flew in to visit him. And I said to my son, how was it seeing her? How did you feel? And I'm like, well, how was she like? And he's like, I don't know. I like walked in and she was sweeping the floors. And I was like, oh my God.
So great.
That became the floors, like cleaning of the floors was my ex-husband's boundary. Like it became his thing. And surprise, surprise, their relationship ended. And he said, I don't know. She just turned into you. I'm like, I don't think she turned into me. I think
she had a voice.
You're supposed to heal these things in yourself and you're going to be presented with the same opportunity over and over again until you address it. So everyone's going to turn into me until you address it. But yeah, it's just, you can't compromise on your well-being anymore. You can't compromise to go back because once you see things and you see how costly it was, in my case, it was my health, you don't want to lose yourself and everything that you know. Like it's not worth it. So you're willing to go on a limb and do things differently and lay the groundwork, like put the train on a different track. I always say, if you want the train to go on a different direction, you got to lay out a different track for it to go on.
Yeah.
And that's the work I had to do. And it's scary and it's lonely and you lose people along the way. And it's novel. So as you're trying to find yourself, you don't know who you are under these new circumstances with these boundaries and these values. They've never been respected before. But, the fact that you started on this, that means you're strong, you're courageous, and it's your opportunity to practice that courage. And when you stick to it, it's an opportunity to practice that self-love and self-respect and dignity, which I find is our birthright, So,
amen. All right. That is a perfect stopping point. And I want to wrap it up with this. Let me just, if I haven't clearly stated it yet, let me explain to you who Anna Maria is and what it is that she does and how her pain has led to her purpose, right? That there's been a gift in this challenge. She's a healing strategist. She focuses on emotional literacy, growth mindset, and complex trauma. She helps men, women, and young adults struggling with burnout, dating, relationships, self-worth, and anything else that stems from having had adverse childhood experiences. I think this will all make sense to all of you now. Here's how she does things differently from other healing modalities out there. She doesn't stubbornly fit clients into a standardized healing mold. Neither do I. That's why I think you and I vibe. Instead, she will mold her skills around the individual healing needs of the client. This is coaching, guys. This is how someone is different when we coach. She has a keen passion for personalized solutions, and her approach is never one size fits all template. So again, as I stated at the beginning, you're going to want to go back to part 1 so you can hear her amazing story of overcoming adversity and what it was, what the moment, the tipping point was that got her to start to explore how her lived experience of growing up in a communist bloc, living through a lot of abuse, living through war, coming here as a 10-year-old, what that all looked like, how this complex set of experiences launched her into a life that was no longer serving her. I think it's fair to say from today's episode, you know your shit. There's no question about that. I mean, when we did our pre-interview chat, we could have just gone on and on because we worked very similarly. It's AnnaMariaLifeCoach.com is her website. Her social media is Anna Maria Life Coach. And if her story, if her experiences, if her background, if the way that she chats vibes with you, reach out to her. She'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you. Let her know that you heard about her on the Flip Your Mindset podcast. So is there anything that you want to share, Anna Maria, as we wrap up today?
No, just thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, bringing this and normalizing the struggle. And also, I always say this on my social media, every single post, and I think it's because I needed to hear this while I was going through the healing journey. I just want to tell people that you're not alone, and hand in hand, we got this.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. It's a great way to end it. Guys, again, it's AnnaMariaLifeCoach.com, Anna Maria Life Coach on all social media handles. And again, if you're listening to this episode and you love it, make sure you subscribe, because when you subscribe, you can be notified of whenever I drop a new cast, which is every single week. Thank you again, Anna Maria, for coming on. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.